This is English shorthand dictation number 209 and the dictation speed is 140 words per minute. Ready? Start. Sir, the bill which I have the honor to move for circulation has given rise to controversy. This is, of course, not unexpected. As I said in my opening observations, the bill is undoubtedly a controversial measure. But I also stated in the course of my opening observations that I do not propose to enter into the controversy today and to reply to the various points that have been made. I do not do so in any spirit or discourtesy to honorable members who have taken part in this debate and presented their point of view. I assure them that I will bear their points in mind and consider their validity on the occasion when such occasion will arise. If I rise at this stage, it is not to reply to the various points that have been made, but I do feel that I am bound to meet certain points of criticism which were made by my honorable friend. There is one point which he made, which I think was very unfair. He said that I have brought in a measure which was vague in some way and which contained empty clauses. His criticism was that I was not justified and that it was unfair on my part to ask the House to consider a bill which contained such vague and empty clauses. I do not accept that criticism, and I do say that it was entirely misconceived and unfounded. I do not admit in the first instance that there are any clauses in this bill which are vague or that there are any clauses in this bill which are empty, so empty as not to enable anybody to understand what the bill aims at. But assuming for a moment that there are certain clauses which are vague and other clauses which require content to be put in, I do not think that the criticism was valid. If I asked the House to proceed to enact the measure in the form in which it was presented, I could have understood the point of the criticism, but that is not what I am doing. I am asking merely the permission of the House that this bill may be circulated for the purpose of eliciting further opinion, so that the government may have guidance from such parties as can give guidance, and the government in the end may be able to fill in the gaps and make definite what is vague. I therefore submit that there was no point in that criticism which my honorable friend made. My honorable friend then said that the bill in his opinion was unsound in principle. Well, that is a matter of opinion. We have heard people on the other side saying that there is a perfectly sound principle in the bill and that it ought to be embodied in an act. Therefore, I shall not dwell on that point of his criticism. The second point that he made was that I have somehow not stated what a representative trade union was. Without meaning any offense, if I may say so, he has either not read the clauses of the bill, or if he has read them, he has not understood them. It is perfectly clear from the provisions that are set out in this bill that there are two principal conditions laid down. One is that a trade union, before it can be recognized, must fulfill certain conditions. The second condition which has been laid down is that mere fulfillment of the conditions laid down is not a qualification enough for recognition, but that the trade union, in addition to fulfilling these qualifications, will have to undergo the test of a certification by a board. In fact, if I may say so, the fundamental principle of the bill is that the representative character of the trade union will depend primarily, subject to other conditions, on the certificate that a tripartite board representing labor, government, and the employers will be able to give. My honorable friend then made great play of clause 28D, which says any further conditions that may be prescribed. I cannot understand how my honorable friend could have so completely misunderstood the purport of that clause. The position of the government is perfectly plain and may be stated briefly. On the basis of the views that were communicated to us from the various organizations representing labor and capital, the government came to the conclusion that the positive conditions which they have laid down ought to be sufficient. But the government does not wish to dogmatize about it, and the government does feel that there might be certain conditions which either the provincial government or the employers of labor or capital may find necessary to be introduced in this bill before recognition is granted. It is to make provision for a contingency of this kind that we have introduced these clauses wherever it is stated that further conditions may be prescribed. It is a loophole. It is an opportunity which we have left and designed to take to ourselves the benefit of any advice that we might receive. There is certainly no vagueness and no uncertainty with regard to the provisions of the bill as to what a representative character means. It is not a blank mind, it is an open mind. That is the way I would like to define my position correctly. My honorable friend, as well as other members who spoke on the bill, said that the government was not justified, or rather, the government was illogical in applying clause 27 by exempting the government undertakings from the operation of this bill. Now, sir, the first point that I would like to make in reply to the contention is that logic is certainly not always life. There are many occasions when illogicality would reduce ourselves to extremism, and I do not think any man would prefer extremism to illogicality. I think if anything could be said with regard to clause 28, it could be said that the government is not timid. The government is not illogical. The government is wise and cautious. I think that this clause has been somewhat misunderstood. There is no intention to exempt the government from the provisions of this bill. All that is said is that a date will be fixed when the provisions of this bill will be applied to the government undertakings. Therefore, if there is any discrimination made in favor of the government, it is not with regard to the application of the bill, but with regard to the date on which it will become applicable to the government. The government feels that, at any rate for the present, the government departments who are employers of labor have made sufficient provision for the recognition of their trade unions. In view of the fact that the government has certainly been far more ready to recognize trade unions than private employers, I do not think that the interests of labor will suffer if the date for the application of this bill is postponed. Sir, industrialization of India has been in the air for many years, but one fails to notice any serious drive to bring about industrialization. There are still some who pay only lip service to it. Others look upon it as a fad, if not a craze. There are very many who are never tired of preaching that India is an agricultural country, and therefore the best thing to do is to devote all energy to improve agriculture and not to run after industrialization. Nobody needs to be told that India is primarily an agricultural country. Everybody knows it. What is surprising is that very few people seem to realize what a great misfortune it is. I know this will not be readily admitted. What more evidence is wanted to prove that this is a misfortune when the famine which is stalking Bengal and other parts of India, and where so many from the agricultural population are dying daily from want of food or from want of purchasing power? To my mind, there can be no greater proof to show that India's agriculture has failed miserably. It is a plain fact that India, which is engaged in producing nothing but food, does not even produce sufficient food to feed its people. The poverty of India, to my mind, is entirely due to its being made dependent upon agriculture.